Hi everyone, I am Samantha Sink, the Annual Giving Officer at UAA. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you that haven't met me yet, I've been at UAA now for about 6 months, and it is such an exciting time to join UAA as it enters the public phase of a campaign that is already the largest in Alaska's history. UAA, with your help, is investing in the core priority areas that have been identified by the University of Alaska as drivers of systemic change and embraced by UAA's 2025 strategic plan. And as you may be familiar, this campaign is called the For Alaska campaign. The For Alaska campaign is an 8-year campaign to raise $200 million for the University of Alaska system. And every dollar that is donated to the UA system is counted towards this goal to build a better Alaska. Since the silent phase of the campaign in 2017, donors across the UA system have contributed $135 million to this goal. And the strategic priorities during this campaign are to create an Alaska with a culture of education and equitable access to education, a source of relevant research, which is why we're here today, a workforce trained for local jobs, a diversified economy, and athletic excellence. Actionable research on pressing issues like impacts of climate change directly affects and benefits Alaska and the Alaskan way of life. UAA plays an important role in developing applied solutions to address Alaska's biggest challenges. To respond to the rapid pace of change in our state and solve problems for our communities, investment will be critical to our ability to conduct research. To focus on actionable research and become a true partner to industry and to federal, state, and municipal agencies, we will develop and enhance sustainable research programs that improve the economic and social well-being of Alaskans, foster high-impact undergraduate research, endow chairs and professorships in key research areas, such as public policy, engineering, entrepreneurship, global logistics, women's studies, business analysis, and healthcare. Today, we've gathered to talk about some of the projects from across the university that show how UAA is developing critical research relevant to Alaska and the Arctic region. There are so many research projects across the whole of UAA, and it was so hard to choose just 4 projects to share with you today, but I think that this is a good representation of at least a little bit of what's going on across the system, across the university. So our first project today will be from Jeff Libby. He is presenting on the Applied Environmental Research Center, AERC, and how they partner with the CTC welding program. Jeff Libby is the director for the Applied Environmental Research Center, and he also serves as the director for the Center of Strategic Partnerships and Research, CASPR, and was formerly the associate dean for technical programs in UAA's Community and Technical College. Jeff?
Hey, thank you very much for the introduction. Appreciate it, Samantha. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Libby. I'm going to actually talk about both centers today, and both of them rely under UAA's Business Enterprise Institute. And I'm going to discuss how they collaborate across the UAA system and engage students with applied research. And I want to start off with the Applied Environmental Research Center, AERC. AERC is one of 9 centers that fall under UAA's Business Enterprise Institute, otherwise known as BEI. One of the most important things you should know about AERC is that this center is entirely self-supporting and does not rely on any state appropriation dollars to support its staff or its operations. AERC leverages a cooperative agreement between the university and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in conjunction with the United States Department of Defense. The center seeks to identify projects that create jobs and opportunities for Alaskans. Prior to AERC's establishment, more than 80% of the applied research activities on JBER was being performed by Colorado State University. This picture is from last fall, and it shows one of UAA's graduate students from the College of Engineering measuring the high tide line in Knik Arm. The student now serves as one of AERC's full-time staff. This is a current project that AERC was awarded that extends for 3 years and requires us to measure coastal erosion and shoreline changes since 1960 along JBER shoreline. The cooperative agreement we currently have exists because of what's referred to as the Sykes Act, which was enacted into United States law in 1960 The act provides for cooperation by the Department of the Interior and Department of Defense, along with state agencies in planning, development, and maintenance of fish and wildlife resources on military reservations throughout the U.S. AERC employs University of Alaska faculty, staff, and students in a variety of applied research activities to ensure the compliance of this act. Although the majority of our projects are on JBER, today we also have projects in Japan, California, Hawaii, and throughout the Aleutian Island chain, including a cultural resource project on Shemya and an archaeological project on Chernovsky. The pictures here show some of UAA's undergraduate students studying bats on JBER. The truck in this picture is actually a really cool story. The Applied Environmental Research Center shares vehicles and equipment with the Community and Technical College. This vehicle was purchased in this shared recharge center, and the college and the research center collaborate and utilize these vehicles. During the summer, AERC utilizes these shared vehicles to conduct research on JBER because we're required to use government vehicles while working on the base. During the academic year, CTC's Automotive and Diesel Technology program uses them for education and training purposes for students and technician training for Alaska's new car dealerships. AERC has several very different and unique projects. Today, we currently have 21 projects in operation, and 11 of those projects are located on JBER. This slide shows some of the types of projects and research activities that we're associated with. The photo here was taken while surveying the shoreline along Alaska's North Slope, which was a previous project that AERC was awarded. The current cooperative agreement that we have with the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Defense has provided over 30 different projects, with the bulk of these activities residing in Alaska. So the AERC joined forces with the Center for Strategic Partnerships and Research, sort of when I took over as director, and utilizing the capabilities of both of these centers, we really strive to engage faculty, staff, and students in research activities and use existing resources that are already available to us in the UA system. One such activity is the design and construction of a new fish weir in Eagle River, and it's used for monitoring salmon escapement. Through the work of both of these centers, a collaborative effort was made to partner with both the College of Engineering and the Community and Technical College on design strategies where students were able to participate and learn about this Department of Defense project. Once the design was approved, we developed a special topics course in the Community and Technical College, which was Tech 490, Fish Weir Design and Fabrication. It was a Saturday class that we ran through the first few weeks of April, and we just wrapped up this last Saturday. In addition to providing all of the materials, the grants and contracts we obtained were able to be utilized for providing the compensation for the faculty members and also provide the funding for the student tuition and all of their related fees. Not only do the students get to learn fabrication on aluminum and steel, but they also get an opportunity to learn about the $100,000 sonar system that counts fish going up and down Eagle River. So it's pretty cool. The sonar basically lives inside this weir from May until October, and it's maintained daily by AERC staff and both graduate and undergraduate students at UAA throughout the field season. The picture on the lower right is the existing weir that was in Eagle River last year, and it has this weird tripod mechanism at the end of it that houses the sonar system, and it has to remain underwater at all times. The new design developed by the College of Engineering that's being constructed by CTC's welding program is the image directly to the left. Additionally, the Center for Strategic Partnerships and Research also includes some workforce development initiatives. One such initiative is Apprenticeship Opportunities within the University of Alaska system. So CASPER, the Center for Strategic Partnerships and Research, serves as a sponsor for registered apprenticeships and is authorized by U.S. Department of Labor as a multi-occupational sponsor. The center acts as a neutral location to partner on expanding apprenticeship opportunities across all of the colleges at UAA and also partner with UAF, UAS, and other external entities. The center collaborates with the American Association of Community Colleges and the National Governance Association through this network, and it's been able to work and engage with more than 300 other colleges and universities to find strategies for helping put people back to work after the pandemic. Traditionally, when we think of apprenticeships, we often associate it with traditional trades and trade unions. But today in Alaska, about 48% of all registered apprenticeships right now are in the healthcare industry in our state. This is a nationwide trend that we're seeing, and the center is now collaborating with statewide UAA's College of Health and Alaska Primary Care Associates to find pathways for bridging the gap from the university to help fill the increasing job demand in our healthcare industry. The other really awesome thing that this center has been doing is it created an entirely new apprenticeship with the United States Department of Labor for the Applied Environmental Research Center. The new apprenticeship was approved last week by both Department of Labor at the US level and in Alaska. And the apprenticeship is for research technicians and allows a pathway for both graduate students and undergraduate students to attend a 2-year apprenticeship at UAA and engage in applied research projects. At the end of the 2 years, the student is eligible for a full-time staff position with the research center. Apprenticeships includes existing coursework from UAA colleges across the board. Every single college has coursework that's integrated into it. So it's not specific to just the biology program, and it provides pathways for any of those students to come in and enroll. This slide shows the current number of student, staff, and faculty engagement between both the Applied Environmental Research Center and the Center for Strategic Partnerships and Research. The images here show some of the data collection and analysis that students are performing while working at these centers. The top picture shows the time of day that most fish were found traveling up Eagle River. The bottom image is a screenshot of a program our students and staff use to monitor ultrasonic frequencies. The images you actually see are bat calls from our acoustic monitoring equipment that is used to study locations of endangered bats on Jay Bear. And I'm going to wrap it up there and put up my contact information if you have anything else, and I will stop my screen share there and open it up for questions and answers.
All right, now if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. We do have some coming up. Okay, the first question is, you mentioned that both research centers don't rely on any state appropriations. Is that correct? Can you explain more about how they're funded?
Yeah, so our cooperative agreement allows us to be, basically it's UAA now under this cooperative agreement, Colorado State University and Montana State. And we're the only 3 under the cooperative agreement umbrella. So when grants drop, we call them tasks, and we get a request for proposal, we apply for these grants, and we're 100% soft funded through grants that we apply for.
Thank you. You have another question. What kind of support do these research centers need?
The biggest thing that we need is when we put in these proposals, for example, like the BAT project that we're doing research on, the acoustic monitoring equipment, each one of those units is about $3,000. And in order to get the grant awards for a project similar to that, we need to have equipment in-house, and the grants don't always provide us an opportunity to buy the equipment. So we end up using some other external funding in order to support our operations to make sure our grants are successful.
Thank you. Another question. How does a student enroll in the research technician apprenticeship?
You can enroll online. There's actually an apply now. If you go to the UAA search box on our homepage and you put in apprenticeships, there's a link right there and it just says apply now, and it automatically feeds to UAA's apprenticeship coordinator, and he notifies me, and then we go through an application process in-house.
Oh, that's great. Okay, Jennifer, do you have a question?
I do. Jeff, how do you determine what research projects you're going to address each year?
Well, it depends on the qualifications, and we look at the faculty that we already work with and what our capabilities are in our college. And our staff is pretty well-rounded in a lot of this. So that's the basics of it. There's certain things that are out of our wheelhouse that we just don't apply for. But if we know that we've got capable faculty and they're willing to work with us, then it's a matter of picking up the phone and making a phone call and saying, hey, do you have availability to work on this? And our grants actually buy out part of their salary or provides summer workload for them. So they're getting a summer contract as well, as instead of a 9-month contract for most faculty members. But it is a little bit difficult because a lot of times, especially with the budget cuts that we're being faced with, faculty are getting stretched a little bit and teaching more, and there's not as much room for research activities as there has been. But when we have, it's a pretty significant amount of funding coming in to support salaries like that, usually it's usually not a problem. They can usually find an adjunct to cover a class or something like that.
Okay, another question. We have just a couple more minutes for this Q&A. So if you have a question, type it quickly. But a question that just popped up, you mentioned partnerships with CTC and the College of Engineering. Does your work overlap with other UAA colleges or departments?
It does. We work with the College of Arts and Sciences regularly because they have their biology program So we have a couple of faculty that pretty much work with us on a regular basis for permitting requirements and helping students get through the system. And this is a great opportunity for faculty members to provide internship credits for students that come to work for AERC. So we work with College of Arts and Sciences, CTC, College of Engineering. We just hired a faculty member from the College of Health to do our Swiftwater training class and also provide first aid and CPR through our College of Health as well.
Thank you. The next question, how many apprentice positions are available?
We just started it last week, so that's a tough question. I have 2 already that we brought on board, and they're both graduate students from the College of Arts and Sciences. And they're both, studying rare plants, invasive species, and they're working on our fisheries project. I would guess that right now we probably have somewhere between 6 and 10 available slots that we could work with. But as I mentioned before, we are soft funded. So when we guarantee at the end of the apprenticeship that they have a full-time staff position, we have to make sure we have enough grants and funding available to support their salaries. But I would say 6 to 10 right now.
Thank you. And you have less than a minute for your Q&A, Jeff, but you have one more question. Any other questions, feel free to send them in the chat and we can respond to them after the program. Your last question, what are the current projects on JBEAR?
We have a bat, endangered bats, or bats are endangered, and there's a huge project with that we've been doing for 3 years on JBEAR and tracking their locations. We have a project for promoting moose browse and a forest resources project, which sort of collaborates with that project, a little bit of overlap to make sure that we're cutting trees and best forest management practices away from the highway. So it's old growth forest to keep moose away from the highway and put them towards the shoreline on JBEAR. We have 3 different fisheries projects. One is in Otter Lake, one is on Eagle River, and then one is in 6 Mile. We also have a coastal erosion study project, which is mission vulnerability, a rare plant and cultural sensitivity plant project, and an invasive species project. And I think that's all I can think of right now. I might have one more lingering, but those are that's the bulk of our work is on JBEAR at the moment. Thanks
so much, Jeff.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to our next speaker now. The next presentation is by Brett Watson about fisheries research within the Institute of Social and Economic Research, ICER. Brett Watson is a resource and applied microeconomist at UA's Institute of Social and Economic Research, who studies Alaska's PFD, mining industry, and fishing economies. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. I'm a little jealous of Jeff here because he has all these cool pictures of, him and his students out doing research in the field, and my research mostly involves sitting in front of a computer, so much less interesting in terms of good pictures. But yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk today about some of the research that we do here at our ICER around fisheries. Mark actually did a great job of teeing up kind of why I think fisheries research here in Alaska is important, but hopefully I can kind of flesh that out a little bit more. I'd say that kind of broadly, ICER's fisheries research portfolio kind of falls into 2 buckets of work. We think about the impacts of fishing to the state, both at the community level and then at a state level. And then we also think about research questions around fishermen behavior. And so what do I mean by these things? Well, on the fisheries impacts front, we think about things like the economic impacts of fishing, which you might imagine an economist might be interested in. But we're also interested in a number of other issues too, including some of the ones that I've noted here. But again, both at the community and at the state level. On the fishermen's behavior front, we're interested in how fishermen respond to external changes in the environment. And that can be the physical environment, thinking about something like climate change, but also the economic environment. So what's going on with seafood prices and how are fishermen responding to those changes? And then it can also be how fishermen respond to public policy. We do a lot of research on this front, how fishermen might respond to area closures or catch limit or quota type regimes. And then we also think about how fishermen are responding to changes in technology. So why care? Why should we do this type of research besides just the fact that it's interesting? Well, kind of on the impacts front, we want one of the principles is that we want resource development to benefit Alaska's people. So when we extract natural resources, when we harvest fish, we'd like the benefits of that activity to flow, at least in part, to the people that are the people of the state of Alaska. And that principle is really so important that the founders of the state of Alaska wrote it into the state's constitution in Article 8, that our fisheries resources should be developed for the maximum benefit of Alaska and its people. On the fisherman behavior front, we want that harvest activity to be sustainable. We want not only for those benefits to happen for us and our generation, but for our children's generation and generations to come. And that principle is also so important that they wrote it into Article 8 of the Constitution. And so not only, I think, are these kind of conceptually important things, but constitutionally and legally, they're also important to deal with. So again, we want to understand what impacts fishing is having on economies to make sure that it's kind of consistent with this principle of maximum benefits. And then when we establish public policy to make fishing more sustainable, we want to make sure that that public policy is consistent with both of these two principles as well. So I want to give a couple of examples of some recent and ongoing research that we have kind of in both of these critical areas. So on the fisheries impact side, me and my co-authors here at ICER, we recently published a paper called Commercial Fisheries and Local Economies. This was published in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management this year. And what we do in this paper is we look at a bunch of data for the state of Alaska. And what we find is that for every dollar in fish that are caught by a fisherman, that returns about $1.50 in value to a fisherman's hometown. The idea here is that when fishermen return with their harvest revenue back into their home communities, they spend it in the local economy, in retail establishments, restaurants, and other places. And that has these economic spillover effects that continue to grow in the economy. And so we estimate that effect there. One of the other things that we do in that paper is we discuss some ways that Alaska might be able to increase that economic impact, how to grow the pie even bigger. And so that's kind of an example of some work that we've got going on the impacts front. On the behavior front, we currently have a paper that's in progress called Structural Behavioral Models for Rights-Based Fisheries, which is kind of a mouthful. But another way to kind of sum up what key question inside that project is really what happens if boats can't catch halibut? And so a lot of you might be familiar with fishing for halibut. Maybe you've taken a charter out of Seward or Homer and into the Gulf of Alaska to try to catch some halibut. One of the things that Alaska's fisheries managers try to do is make sure that they kind of spread the halibut around for everybody. And so one of the things that we're trying to understand at ICER here is what happens if we tell certain groups of fishermen that they have to fish less halibut? Well, they'll likely respond to that policy change. Maybe there's certain areas of the ocean that have a lot of halibut in them. They might respond to that policy change by going and fishing in a different area of the ocean. But of course, there's different species of fish that live in that other part of the ocean. So I've got an example here. There's this certain area in the Bering Sea that might not have very much halibut in it, but it's got a lot of this other species of fish in it, yellowfin sole. And so by creating this policy where we're trying to limit the amount of halibut that fishermen are catching, we might increase the amount of yellowfin sole that they're taking. And maybe that's not an outcome that we want. And so it's really important to understand these kind of complex economic and biological systems. There's that important interaction there. And so that's one of the things that an economist that can kind of help understand these issues from the perspective of, because these are businesses that are making business decisions as they go out and fish these different species. So that's another example of kind of an ongoing project that we have. I want to kind of wrap up by talking about what I think are some of the really neat opportunities that ICER has in this space of fisheries econ. So kind of big picture, Alaska's fisheries are worth billions of dollars. Alaska is the #1 state in the country for seafood harvest, just in terms of raw value. And so it's really important to the state's economy. And then it's also important to the national economy too, and it's an important source of food supply. So along with kind of that big picture, there's a really rich sets of data, both at the state and federal levels, to be able to conduct fisheries research in Alaska. And so that's a really neat thing that we have going for us. And then Mark had mentioned earlier that ICER has kind of a long history of doing fisheries research in the state. And we've got really good partnerships with stakeholders, including state and federal government agencies, harvest and seafood processing companies, and then other relationships with local governments and communities. And I think kind of the big takeaway for me is that, you know, what we can learn in trying to maximize these benefits and sustain fisheries here, we can really take some of those lessons and they can help inform fisheries management in other places around the world too. And so I think not only is this research important for Alaskans, but it's also a great place to learn about good management practices globally as well. So I'll go ahead and stop there and kind of turn it over for the Q&A period. Let's see, there we go.
Thanks so much, Brett. Take a couple of minutes for Q&A. We're running a little bit late on our schedule. What makes Alaska an interesting place to study fisheries?
So I think I had mentioned a couple of things here that we just have a really rich wealth of data. And so that I think that makes Alaska a pretty interesting place to do this work. One of the other things too, I had mentioned this paper that we recently finished on the local economics impacts of fisheries. One of the things that enabled us to do that work was Alaska has this neat database that's enabled because of the permanent fund dividend. And some of these other state programs, you know, that were really set up for one thing, allow us to do really cool research in other spaces as well. And so that's one of the reasons I think this is a great space to be in.
Thank you. Next question. What would expanded fisheries research capacity at ICER look like?
Well, you know, right now, I think that one of the things that it would be really great to have is our economics program at UAA doesn't have a master's or graduate program. And so I was actually brought up here and I'm currently a postdoc. I'll be transitioning into a full-time research faculty starting this fall. But I think one of the things that we would really do with expanded capacity is try to bring up more postdocs, more visiting graduate students, potentially with some folks that we have relationships with throughout the lower 48. And there's just a lot of interesting research areas that we can tackle here. I mentioned kind of a wide breadth of them, and so yeah, we could definitely use some more capacity to be able to tackle some of these issues.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question. Your PhD is in mineral and energy economics. How did you make the transition from rocks to fish?
So as it turns out, rocks and fish have an important thing in common, at least in terms of the way that you produce them. And that's that when you dig into the ground, you can't really control what you pull out of the ground. So there's a lot of mines out there that produce more than one type of metal. And there's a lot of fisheries that produce more than one type of fish. And so I had mentioned in my presentation that we're working on this project right now, looking at kind of these interactions between halibut and yellowfin sole, for example. In what's called a multi-species fishery. It's very similar to how we think about modeling from an economic perspective, how a producer might produce what's called a polymetallic deposit or a multi-metal mine. And so I was just kind of interested in these polymetallic deposits, and it was actually kind of a natural swing to move over to fish.
Thank you. Another question, we'll try to speed through. We have a couple more questions. How do you see growth in Alaska's fishing economies?
That's a really great question. So, I mean, one important thing to recognize here is Alaska has really well managed fisheries that are fairly sustainably harvested, meaning that it's probably not super likely that we'll see growth, you know, just from going gangbusters, right, out by catching more fish. And so one of the opportunities that I see kind of for more economic growth along fisheries is for Alaska to try to capture more of the value that's created through fish harvest. So right now, one of the things that happens is that we catch fish out in the Bering Sea, and that fish often gets exported straight to Asia for further processing. So if you've ever bought like a frozen packet of fillet of fish, that's fish that's probably caught somewhere in the Bering Sea and then sent to for Asia to create these fisheries products. I think it would be really neat for Alaska to try to do more of that processing here in the state certainly create more economic opportunity and more economic value here.
Thank you. Next question is ICER evaluating the impact of new technology to monitor fishing practices?
I mean, it's certainly something that we're keeping our eyes on. We don't have any specific projects in mind, but if someone has like a specific technology that they think is interesting that's coming down the pipe, they should certainly send me an email. I'd be interested in chatting more about it.
Okay, and then last question that I'll have time to ask you today, Brett. There's lots of questions. This is great. What insight do you have around the salmon industry specific to commercial and subsistence?
That's yeah, a great question. I mean, so yeah, there's kind of three important components of Alaska's salmon harvest. There's the commercial side, and then there's the sport fishing side too. You know, folks coming up to get on a charter and catch some salmon. And then there's the subsistence fishing too. And it's really important as we think about fisheries policy in the state to weigh those different constituencies. You know, they all have somewhat competing interests, but I think generally have aligned interests in that we want to be able to all enjoy our salmon resources together collectively. And so that creates a kind of a balancing act for the state. You know, I think that one piece of this puzzle is some of the work that, like I mentioned us doing on the economic impacts of fishing. That focused specifically on commercial fishing, but one could imagine that some of the other missing puzzle pieces are what are the economic impacts of subsistence and sport fishing. And I know ICER's done some work in that space, but it probably could use a dusting off and an update. So probably look for future work in that space to come.
Thank you so much, Brett.
You bet. Yeah, thank you all.
Our next presentation is by Sandra Shaganov Stewart, and her presentation is about the language revitalization and language lab. Sandra is the current Alaska Native Studies Program Chair and Alaska Native Studies, and she teaches Alaska Native Studies courses at UAA. She received her MA from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks in applied linguistics, second language acquisition teaching with a focus on task-based language teaching, which she teaches native language through cultural projects. Sandra?
Yahalin Landu, Charashko Tinta, Sandra Shaganov Stewart, Kashkava Sa'a, Dena Ena Shiiji, Dena Ena Katlana Kashno Chokoyashtu, UAA Chair, Alaska Native Studies, Atna Duchtaldichan, Kashno. How are you? My name is Sandra Shaganov Stewart. I work at UAA for the Chair of Alaska Native Studies Department, and I teach the Atna Dene language. I live and work in the land of the Dena'ina people, and I recognize the people of our land. I introduce myself in Dena'ina language, and I'm going to speak to you today about revitalizing Alaska Native languages, creating a space for place-based language, teaching, and pedagogy. In this picture, we see Peter Kalifornsky on the left, and he was the first Indigenous writer to write literature in the Dena'ina language. This was very significant as it spurred the development of the first class and the study of the Dena'ina language at the Kenai Peninsula College. Dr. Boris, longtime KPC anthropologist and linguist, helped in this process and earned the Dena'ina name, Tikosech, which means breaking trail. Currently, we offer 3 native languages at the elementary level. Because Dena'ina and Atna are in a fragile state of being, continued elder participation is paramount in the continuing the development of language resources and building a knowledge repository. This space allows for language documentation and collaboration with elders and Indigenous speakers. So we created this room with recording devices, web conferencing technology, and comfortable furniture for our elders. All of these languages have adapted their teaching to make the learning engaging, interactive, and innovative. The focus of learning is to help students to speak and begin using the language in everyday usage. All of our teachers use methods that are hands-on items with items that are natural to the Indigenous culture and with everyday words. Having a technologically advanced lab allows students and elders to stay at their own village to participate and share learn the language. We cannot stress how much work depends on elders. Alaska Native elders and elder adjuncts are the libraries of Indigenous people. Nakanagat Nakcharitnak is a denia phrase that means we are taking back our language. This is a strong statement as Native people are no longer waiting for someone to give back the language. It is time to reverse this language shift or decline. So learning to speak the language, learning the writing system, learning online, and meeting with other language learners through gatherings and conferences will create our own support and strength to make these pathways for the next generation. As we're losing elders, we are losing knowledge as we are in a race with time because of this. This learning lab demonstrates that the university supports all of these efforts to hold Indigenous language and knowledge as vital for all communities. These courses encapsulate place-based learning and culture from the people who have always been here. In addition, Alaska Native language illustrates a different way of thinking and supports a different mindset of thinking and learning. Students at KPC have commented on how language classes and learning from elders help them transition to higher education. As you can see in these pictures, we have moved out of the classroom and used cultural practices for teaching. This seems to hint that visibility of Alaska Native languages and studies can aid in retention of Alaska Native students. In conclusion, I hope that we can discuss more about building and supporting Alaska Native languages. I do believe that KPC is developing cutting-edge teaching methodologies that will shape how we move forward with sustaining Native languages in our communities, but also for Alaska. What we do at KPC for Native languages is being noticed throughout the UA system. Chikanik, Chinan, Chinon, Koyana, for listening and supporting these programs. Hana.
Thank you so much, Sandra. We have our first question in. Remember to type them in the box for me to read your questions. How many Dena'ina speakers exist?
For each of the native language groups, there are different levels and also different speakers for each native group. For our Dena'ina people, in Kenai, there are no more language speakers, so they are working with other Dena'ina dialects to help bring in the language again and revitalize it and reclaim the language again back in the area. Yupik language that we teach at the college is very strong and has a really large base in Western Alaska. And so we have a lot of fluent speakers. For the Ada language, there's probably less than 20 native speakers. And also in the area where my family is from, there are no more speakers there. We are adapting along with the Dena'ina people are doing. We're putting dialects together and focusing on the dialect and bringing it into our area of influence. I also have to say too that I'm here with Dr. Chris Stivey, who is also from KPC, and she's going to be helping me with these questions because she's right there, right on campus, and we've been working on this project both together.
Thank you to the both of you. Your next question. What are the biggest challenges facing Alaska Native languages and reversing language shift?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is really our elders and the loss of our elders at a rapid rate. We've really noticed this in the past year with the pandemic, as many of our elders were very vulnerable, and then not having this, I guess, connection with all of us and family, it really put the language in a state of scarcity. But I think also full-time language research needs to happen so that we can have this language continue through written language and also through videos, and continue the research to develop these curriculums. And that's why I believe that this language lab is so important for not just the language that is there in Dena'ina country. It's also important for our Ahtna languages, our Yupik languages that are utilized there, but also throughout Alaska. We need to have more of these language labs in each of these college systems, as well as in the community colleges, which are even more vital because that's where most of the languages are vital in each of our communities. And one more thing too. One more thing. There is no degree program for these languages, and so not having that pathway is something that needs to be developed. And that's why this curriculum is so important to the growth of our language in the university system, but also in our communities. Excuse me, Chris. Go ahead.
No, I think that's a part of restorative justice. I think there's the other challenge to Alaska Native languages is because the languages are in a state of disrepair because of trauma and because of colonization, it can be very painful for elders even to talk about their language because of what they experience and when their language was taken. So we have an elder who talks about when she went to school, having to sit on rock salt on her knees and having her mouth washed out for speaking her dirty language. So when those traumas come up, and these are the only pathways to retaining or learning in that language, there's a lot of emotional pain that is associated with the language speaking as well. And so we have to create safe environments for this to occur, which is why we have an Alaska Native language lab specifically for Alaska Native, not just an all-purpose language lab.
Yes.
Thank you. We have so many questions for you, Sandra, and I won't have time to address all of them because our last speaker has a time commitment and we're running close. We're going to run a little bit past our time today, but I'll ask one more, and then if you could answer the questions in the chat box for our other questions, that would be really helpful. The one I'll say out loud, are there the Sukpiaq and Aluptic language classes?
Yes, they are available online also, not through the Kenai Peninsula College, but they are through the Kodiak College. And they have spectacular teachers. So we're hoping language labs like this would be available closer to wherever anybody is interested in the language, because a lot of our people are living all over Alaska and they want to connect back to their language, their ancestral language, because that creates that sense of identity. And also even on campus, our Native students who come from different areas connecting to the language, even no matter where they're at, really helps them with retention, with being in school, because they have that one thing that they can connect to that helps them think of home, but also maybe learn more about themselves and become better students.
Thank you so much. Okay, I was copy pasting some that were sent anonymously to me into the box so you guys can respond.
All right. I want to say thank you, Chinan, Chikanik, to everybody being here. The research has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. Okay, our last speaker today is Dr. Scott Hamill. He's going to be presenting on built-up ice at the Port of Alaska in Anchorage. Dr. Hamill is a researcher in the area of structural engineering with a concentration in mechanics, which includes the mechanical behavior of ice and ice structure interaction.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully this will work. Oh, I lost all of you, but that's okay. Okay, so yeah, I'm from the College of Engineering, particularly civil engineering, and there's lots and lots of civil engineering research going on, but I'm going to focus on one particular project in the area of structural engineering. I should also mention that, you know, in addition to civil engineering, there's a lot of research in mechanical and computer science, particularly. So I'm going to focus in on one particular project instead of kind of giving you a general overview. And this is a project that is going on at the Port of Alaska. It's funded by the ConocoPhillips Endowment. And it was awarded about 1.5 years ago. It's a 2-year project. So what I'm going to actually spend a fair amount of time talking about the problem because it's kind of complicated. And so the first thing to know here is that, of course, as all of us know, Alaska has a huge tidal range. It turns out it's the biggest in the United States. And also coupled with that is that the Port of Alaska, which is in Anchorage, we have lots of piles. Here's a shot of a low tide shot. And so, of course, they have to be able to withstand the full 25 or higher feet of tidal movement. And so they're really tall. It's like a 3-story building at low tide. And what happens with these in the winter is that the tide moves up and down, and whenever the air temperature is below freezing, some of that water freezes to the pile when the tide is going out. And so you get what you see here, which is these built up or accreted ice on the piles. And it gets thicker and thicker, just as similar to dipping a candle. It gets thicker and thicker as the winter progresses. And then, yeah, some years they get really thick, depending on the air temperature. And then unrelated to this, we have ice that floats around in Cook Inlet. It's a free water port. It's not an ice. It's technically defined as an ice-free port, but there is ice. It's not locked in with ice, but there's big rafts of ice that float around. There can be a couple of feet thick, and they can do a lot of damage if they blow in and hit our series of piles. And so you have to design your piles to be, to not be damaged by these ice coming in. So, and so all this put together, what we end up with here is down here, I have a little graphic of the ice, the floating ice, the raft ice kind of coming in. And if you have a clean pile, what happens is that it hits the pile and only the pile, and it crushes the raft. And in the middle, you see what happens if you have these big built up ice is that the pile effectively from the raft's perspective has gotten a whole lot bigger. And so you see that here. And so what that translates to is a bunch more force that gets imparted to the pile. And on the right-hand side, what you see is that this can happen kind of in the middle of these really tall piles. And so what happens at the end of the day is that we have to design, we basically put a whole lot more steel, which is a whole lot more cost into building this infrastructure. And this also has seismic considerations. Obviously we live in an earthquake zone, and so there's a lot of issues with the seismic design of a 30-foot tall thing on stilts. And so why is this super relevant at the moment? Well, we're currently in the midst of building a new port, essentially. They're replacing a lot of the port, And so they want to know exactly how much force this potential problem could create on this system. And so what are we doing? Well, we want to know, one of the things is no one has ever figured out what this ice it looks like. So, what is the strength? What is the density? What is the salinity? No research has ever been done, with the exception of there's a little bit in Svalbard by a Norwegian researcher, but theirs are a little different because they don't have much for tides. They have more ice, but less tides. So, and so first we had to do a lot of innovating to kind of figure this out on just how to do the research. So here you see we're collecting ice. We actually ended up deciding we had to figure out how to do that safely. We ended up using a tree service company and a bunch of chainsaws. Here's some more shots of the tree climbers out there. A little dangerous hanging from a rope with a chainsaw in your hand, but that's what they did, which is why I didn't do it. The second thing we had to do is develop a method to actually get our specimens out of the blocks. We can see here one of my students, undergraduate students, who's doing a preliminary thing that didn't really work very well, actually. And so we went through a series of iterative steps to figure out how to go about doing this. You can see we designed a little jig, and so we've succeeded in that. We've come up with a way to do that. Here's actually a little video of us kind of drilling ice, which is not super exciting, but it's kind of neat to see. And since we have a cold room, we can do this all year long. And then the next thing we had to do was we had to actually develop a place to test this. So that white box there that you see is actually something that we built. The first thing that we showed there was a cold temperature chamber, but we had to move the cold onto the test machine. So here the box is around this test machine that has 100,000 pounds of capacity where we can crush ice or bend beams or whatever we need to do, and we can do them at any temperature that we want. So there's the final thing with a cylinder that we cored in the test machine at temperature being tested. So that's kind of where we are right now, that we're only about halfway through the research. So the next steps is to just kind of do a whole bunch of testing and cutting and coring. And then we have to, analyze our data, and then we're going to develop some computer models and simulate the ice impacting the built up ice on the piles. And then, propose that and talk to the port about how this will actually impact the design of new piles going forward. So, okay, with that, I will stop sharing my screen and take any questions you have.
All right, if you have any questions, remember to type them in the chat box. We only have a couple more minutes with Dr. Hamill today, so any remaining questions, I will, of course, have him follow up with you. We do have a couple here already. First question, does this research involve graduate students or undergraduate students?
So the great thing about all of our research, particularly in the College of Engineering, is that it usually involves both. This particular one has a full-time graduate student who is also a person who's in our fast track program, so kind of simultaneous undergraduate and graduate degree. But the student shown at the end was actually an undergraduate student. So we actually have a little bit of a hard time in engineering getting graduate students or keeping graduate students because there's a lot of jobs in engineering in Anchorage at the moment, and so we cannot seem to get them to stay. And so I actually employ 4 or 5 or 6 undergraduate students in my lab just to help out and be involved and stuff. So yeah, both.
Thank you. Do you have any preliminary theories?
Yeah, I think so far the ice has seemed pretty, the technical term would be crappy. It's not very good ice. It's porous and it has low salinity content and it's layered. And so I think that we're going to get weak strengths, which is good, because what that means is that the rafts of ice, when they come in, they'll actually break off the built up ice instead of actually having to crush the raft. And so that should significantly reduce how much force the pile has to absorb. So that's just a guess though, from having drilled and sawn into it. So. Thank
you. And I will follow up with you, Scott. I know that you have have a time commitment that we're coming right on the edge of, but I want to thank all of the speakers today. Your learning about your projects has been just absolutely fascinating, and I hope that everyone enjoyed it as much as I did too. We ran about 10 minutes over today, so out of respect for all the donors and supporters that are here too, I'll let you go also, but please email me with any questions, and just thank you so much for everything you do for the university.